You once wondered, what will happen to gold if interest rates jump from 0 to 5%? The majority of individuals likely expected it to be lower than its current level. That it takes place at all is therefore quite astonishing. Central banks are buying a lot. That's why it's the go-to reserve asset for governments worried about dollar debasement or freezing depending on their perspective. The fact that your limited funds are self-custodial and resistant to unilateral freezing is, thus, an appealing feature. Accordingly, I anticipate that gold will likely do really well in the years to come. Given the multi-market nature of gold and other metals throughout history, I believe Bitcoin poses the greatest threat to it. There are two markets, one for central banks and another for regular investors. Moreover, Bitcoin is currently preferred by a segment of the retail industry. The Kingdom of Bhutan, for instance, was mining Bitcoin, along with a few smaller quantities and even sovereigns. Some of the Emirates are investing in assets linked to Bitcoin. It is that area that Singapore is considering. El Salvador is yet another example of a country that is on the periphery, therefore that is also of interest to several countries in the periphery. Money does compete with other forms of currency. Since Bitcoin is the younger and more volatile cryptocurrency, I believe it will certainly outperform the others. It is dependent on the global internet functioning at a reasonable level. Such things are crucial to its operation in contrast to gold, which serves primarily as a safety net and analog currency. Lyn Alder joins us today to provide her thoughts on central bank strategy, Bitcoin, and gold, which have sparked fascinating disputes in the financial industry, highlights the unexpected stability of gold, which defies expectations of a decrease. When discussing the dollar's debasement, she focuses on the central bank's purchases and the appealing meddling as a reserve asset. Not only are retail investors warming up to Bitcoin, but even sovereign entities like Bhutan, the Emirates, and El Salvador are showing interest in it, according to Lyn, making it a formidable rival to gold. Competition between digital assets and more conventional ones highlights a trend toward different monetary values, pointing to a future in which Bitcoin and gold both play important roles. The interplay between digital currencies, precious metals, and the changing tactics of central banks in light of these monetary landscape developments will be further examined in an upcoming in-depth examination of Lyn Alder's findings. More centralization has been the standard response to most financial frictions during the last several centuries. It becomes costly to transfer, safeguard, and authenticate gold with each significant settlement if, for instance, there are frictions in the process. No, we're going to rely on an outside entity instead. We may simply approach that third party and request that they transfer funds from one of our accounts to the other, or vice versa, whenever you and I wish to conduct a transaction. The deed to the gold, rather than the gold itself, is what changes hands most often on a central ledger. When there were a number of them, it became clear that central banking was an additional layer to consider. Third parties can still transfer value by transferring their reserves to a larger bank and then instructing the larger bank to transfer a large amount of credits from their account to theirs. Because of this, we established a global network of ever-increasing central banks to handle the vast majority of financial transactions, since data and transactions can travel at the speed of light but physical currency cannot. Even if we remove gold from circulation, at least partially, central banks will still be able to use it as collateral. However, even when we remove it from the system, it continues to rely on these centralized ledgers. The first problem is that it gives the central authority too much power. They can decide how many units there are. Many of these currencies debase rather rapidly, particularly when one considers the long tail of 160 distinct currencies, and that is the unit of measurement for people's wages and savings. They also have control over which transactions can be made, which funds can be blocked, and which users can transact with others. And Bitcoin was the first big departure from that pattern. That is, we now have decentralized ways to transmit and update a global ledger because that and many other things, encryption, technology, bandwidth, have improved. This means that various decentralized entities can collaborate in a rules-based, energy-backed way to manage a ledger rather than relying on a single central authority. Consequently, censoring it is a daunting task. Degrading it is difficult. That represents a change in the available options in a sense. Therefore, I believe that technology is worth relying on. Plus, it's been, 15 years. The product has been tested. Is it very sturdy? How effective is it going to be? You can accomplish that in several ways. What more is this technology capable of? The significance of alternative open-source protocols should not be overlooked. As an example, there is Nostr, an open-source social media protocol that facilitates connections between various ecosystems. If you encounter censorship on one social media network and another as well, you may always turn to these open-source alternatives. It seems to me that we are currently living in a world where financial and data systems are more prone to being regulated, restricted, and otherwise subjected to friction. Whether it's financial or data-related, open-source alternatives serve as release valves that allow individuals to circumvent these barriers and construct items that gradually fortify these networks. To me, that is of the utmost significance. How do you feel about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies coexisting? It seems like that's how I usually think. To me, Bitcoin seems like a kind of alternative and international reserve asset money. Is it possible that fiat may fail in the end? Perhaps not with a roar, but with a squeak. So in the past, they all do, and they're all often not sustainable. Before they finally give out, they can take far longer than anyone anticipates. The demand for such currencies is essentially represented by all the debt that is nominated in those currencies. It may take quite a while for their worth to depreciate completely. Plus, you may always reset them if their value drops. Centralized entities have the option to demonetize their currencies and begin anew. Therefore, I believe that Bitcoin gradually erodes these 160 fiat currencies. Simply put, it offers an alternative to centralized base networks, namely this decentralized open one. However, it must, of course, face a number of obstacles. In the absence of blocking, censorship, or hacking, it essentially grows stronger with each passing year. I believe that there will be coexistence for a long time if that trend continues. However, I do believe that many nations will find it increasingly difficult to maintain their own fiat currencies in the future. If the big ones can figure it out, maybe they can keep it going for a while longer. Maintaining those currency monopolies is quite difficult in my opinion, and the problem starts with the long tail of weaker nations. I don't understand the connection between Bitcoin and liquidity. You have been keeping a careful eye on it, I know that. When you think about the Bitcoin community's future, what do you see? I see. As an example, a basic currency analysis would involve analyzing the value of one currency relative to another. In this case, the dollar would be the most relevant comparison due to its status as the world's reserve currency. In other words, you want to know the basics of the difference between the two. It follows that Bitcoin is clearly less common. It's open, it has energy backing. There is control over the dollar's depreciation. It does, however, experience periods of stricter and periods of looser policy. For instance, holding dollars relative to anything else becomes much less appealing when interest rates are zero and the money supply is rising. Conversely, interest rates are raised to 5% by the Federal Reserve. And with that, real rates have turned positive. In the short term at least, that acts as a brake on the dollar's appreciation. As a result, other items with a monetary value shrink slightly. They are slightly compressed. Therefore, the question of what is the worldwide money supply in US dollars is really what global liquidity is trying to answer. For all the dollar diamond debt floating about, that is relevant. In most cases, a correction or consolidation is taking place in Bitcoin market when that indicator is flat or declining. Additionally, Bitcoin tends to rise in tandem with that. It makes logical to compare this smaller growing money with a larger incumbent money that goes through cycles of loosening and hardening. The two are essentially the same. So, in my opinion, Bitcoin will eventually become this glue that holds many other currencies together, serving as a medium of exchange and decentralized storage of value for individuals all around the globe. And it undergoes yet another test annually. Can anything be done to halt it? Is it hackable? Will it be possible to have it centralized? Is permission possible? In the years it falls short, I predict that it will gradually gain market share and showcase other systems in a manner reminiscent to rolling 4-year periods.